The crimson flare ripped across the violet sky, a searing lash against Solara's protective energy field. Elijah swore, his hand flying to the console as the reading spiked. Another coronal mass ejection from Ethel, the smaller, more volatile of Solara's twin suns. He'd been monitoring the star's activity for months, predicting this surge, yet the raw power still stunned him. He thought of his parents, vaporized in a similar flare on a different colony, a different sun. The memory, a cold knot in his gut, fueled his relentless work. Solara wouldn't claim another family. The emergency systems kicked in, the colony's shields holding, but barely. He had to assess the damage to the external sensors, the ones closest to the sunward. The symbiotic flora out there, sensitive to Solara's energy flows, would be the first to show the effects of Ethel's fury. The air shimmered with heat as he stepped out of the shielded outpost. The sunward, usually a vibrant tapestry of bioluminescent foliage, was dimmed, the colors muted. He moved carefully, scanning with his handheld sensor, when a soft rustling made him pause. A figure emerged from the shadows of the giant ferns, her skin shimmering with an ethereal light. It was Kira, a Solaran unlike any he had met before. Her bioluminescent patterns, usually flowing like liquid moonlight, pulsed erratically, reflecting the disturbed energies of the sunward. A wave of empathy, so potent it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. It was the planet itself, mourning, grieving. He felt it through her, a raw, visceral connection that both terrified and enthralled him. "The sunward weeps," she whispered, her voice a melody of rustling leaves. Ethel's anger is a warning. Elijah, a man of science, struggled to reconcile the data with the almost mystical pronouncements of the Solarans. But he couldn't dismiss the evidence of his own senses, the strange resonance he felt with Kira, with the very ground beneath his feet. A warning of what? Her luminous eyes, huge and dark, met his. Of imbalance. Of those who would take without giving. He frowned. He'd heard whispers of Obsidian Corporation's plans to tap into Solara's unique energy streams, a project he'd initially dismissed as reckless. Now, seeing Kira's distress, he felt a chilling premonition. He reached out, wanting to comfort her, to understand. He hesitated a fraction of a second, unsure if his touch would be welcome, if it would even be safe. Her skin felt like warm silk, radiating a soft glow. The pulsing light beneath her fingertips intensified, shifting from a worried flicker to a hesitant, almost hopeful, ember. He pulled back, surprised by the intensity of the shared sensation, a fleeting connection that transcended words. He felt a flicker of something more. He quickly buried it. His work, his dedication to protecting the colony, had to come first. But a seed had been planted, a fragile hope in the midst of growing unease. The sunward hummed with a low, resonant energy, a song only Elijah was beginning to hear. He spent days after the surge, poring over sensor readings, charting the erratic fluctuations in Solara's energy fields. The data was chaotic, defying his attempts at rational explanation. Yet, he sensed an underlying pattern, a delicate harmony hidden beneath the surface noise. He needed Kira. He needed her intuitive understanding of this world, her connection to the very pulse of the planet. He found her by the Whispering Falls, a cascade of shimmering, bioluminescent water that flowed from the heart of the sunward. She sat on a moss-covered rock, her skin radiating a soft, emerald glow. He approached cautiously, his boot sinking slightly into the soft, spongy ground. The air thrummed with the planet's energy, amplified here, near the falls. He could almost feel it tingling on his skin. "The sunward is still troubled," he said, holding up his data pad. "The energy fluxes are unusual." She looked up, her luminous eyes reflecting the emerald light of the falls. "The sunward remembers Ethel's anger. It fears the Obsidian Hand." He knew she referred to Obsidian Corporation, but her words, always cloaked in metaphor, frustrated his scientific mind. "What does it fear? What are they doing?" She rose, her movements fluid and graceful. "They take what is not offered. They break the flow." She led him deeper into the sunward, to a clearing where the trees grew in a tight circle, their branches intertwined, forming a living canopy. The air here was thick with a sweet, intoxicating scent. He felt a strange pressure in his chest, a sense of awe mingled with apprehension. "This is the heartwood," she whispered. "The source of Solara's lifeblood." He could feel it, a powerful energy radiating from the center of the clearing. He wanted to study it, to quantify it, but he also sensed the sacredness of this place, the deep reverence in Kira's eyes. He swallowed the questions that burned on his tongue, a growing unease settling in his gut. He felt a pull towards her, a need to understand not just the science of Solara, but the spirit. He reached out, his hand hovering just above hers. He hesitated, remembering the intensity of their previous touch. He wasn't sure he could handle that again, the raw emotion that flooded through him, the brief but profound connection. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Her skin pulsed with a soft, amber light. She nodded, slowly extending her hand. Their fingers brushed, and a jolt of energy arced between them, less intense this time, but more sustained. He felt her warmth, the smooth, almost silken texture of her skin. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a desire to shield her, to shield this fragile world, from the looming threat he couldn't fully comprehend. He knew he should be focusing on the data, on finding a scientific solution to the impending crisis. He knew he should be reporting back to the colony, warning them of the potential dangers. But he couldn't bring himself to leave her, to break this nascent connection. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that his destiny was intertwined with hers, with the fate of this extraordinary planet and its enigmatic people. He had a life back on Earth, a chance to return, to rebuild. But in that shared touch, in the quiet communion of the sunwood, he knew he couldn't leave. He was rooted here, bound to Solara, bound to Kira, by a force stronger than gravity, stronger than reason. He was home. The Obsidian Corporation's presence on Solara was no longer subtle. Massive drilling rigs, like metallic thorns, pierced the earth near the sunwood's edge. Transport ships, their engines a low, guttural hum, crisscrossed the violet sky, hauling away Solara's lifeblood. Elijah watched, a growing dread tightening his chest. The data confirmed what Kira's whispers had foretold: the energy extraction was destabilizing the planet. The air thrummed with a nervous energy, the vibrant colors of the sunwood fading to a sickly, muted hue. He found Kira in the heartwood, her skin flickering with an agitated, amber light. The usually serene clearing felt tense, the air thick with anxiety. He knelt beside her, his hand hovering just above her arm. He still wasn't sure if his touch would comfort or disturb her, if the difference in their physiology would cause her pain. "They are poisoning Solara," she said, her voice a low, mournful melody. "The flow is broken." He gently placed his hand on her arm. Her skin felt surprisingly warm, almost human. The amber light intensified for a moment, then subsided, replaced by a soft, calming green. He felt a wave of gratitude, of shared sorrow, wash over him. He wanted to tell her that he wouldn't let them destroy her world, but the words felt hollow, inadequate against the enormity of the threat. "I'll talk to them," he said, his voice tight with determination. "I'll show them the data. They have to understand." Her eyes, dark and luminous, held a trace of skepticism. The obsidian hand does not listen to whispers. It only understands greed. He knew she was right. The corporation, driven by profit, had ignored previous warnings from the Solarans. He felt a surge of anger, of helplessness. He was just one scientist, one voice against a powerful, ruthless entity. But he had to try. For Kira. For Solara. For the memory of his family, lost to the indifference of another star. He returned to the human colony, his mind racing. He presented his findings to the council, the data stark and undeniable. The energy extraction was disrupting Solara's delicate ecosystem, threatening not only the Solarans but the human colony as well. His words were met with skepticism, with indifference. Some dismissed his concerns, citing Obsidian Corporation's assurances of safety. Others, more pragmatic, worried about the economic consequences of halting the energy project. He felt a wave of despair, of betrayal. He looked at the faces around the table, the faces of the people he was supposed to protect, and saw only apathy, greed. He thought of Kira, of her unwavering faith in him, and he knew he couldn't give up. That night, he made a decision. A transport ship was leaving for Earth, its cargo hold filled with Solara's stolen energy. He could be on it, returning home, leaving this doomed planet behind. He closed his eyes, picturing his childhood home, the familiar blue sky, the comforting warmth of the sun. He could start over, rebuild his life, forget the pain, the loss. But he opened his eyes, the image of Kira's luminous eyes, the feel of her warm skin beneath his fingertips, burning in his memory. He couldn't leave her. He couldn't abandon Solara. He had found a new home, a new purpose. He wouldn't let it be destroyed. He found Kira again, standing on a precipice overlooking the obsidian drilling site. Her skin pulsed with a fierce, violet light. He'd never seen her like this, so resolute, so angry. "I'm going to them," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "I will show them the true cost of their greed." He grabbed her arm, fear gripping his heart. "No. It's too dangerous. They'll..." She turned to him, her eyes blazing. "I must. For Solara. For my people." He saw the unwavering determination in her eyes, the profound connection she had to this world. He knew he couldn't stop her. He could only stand by her side, face the obsidian hand together. "Then I'm going with you," he said, his voice firm, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a surge of love for her, a profound respect for her courage, for her unwavering devotion to her world. He knew, in that moment, that he was no longer just a scientist, a researcher. He was a protector, a guardian of this fragile, extraordinary planet, and of the woman who held its heart in her hands. Elijah knew he had to convince the Colony Council. He'd spent the night compiling the most compelling data, charting the escalating instability in Solara's energy fields, correlating it with Obsidian Corporation's relentless extraction. He paced the small confines of his quarters, a knot of anxiety tightening in his gut. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, his parents, smiling, oblivious to the solar flare that would consume them hours later. He couldn't fail Kira, not like he'd failed them. He presented his case with a controlled urgency, laying out the evidence, pleading for them to see reason. But the council members remained impassive, their faces etched with skepticism. "We appreciate your concern, Vance," Councilman Gregor said, his voice laced with condescension, "but Obsidian Corporation assures us their operations are perfectly safe. Their energy is vital to the colony's growth." "Safe?" Elijah's voice rose, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "The sunwood is dying. The planet is reacting. Don't you see?" "Kira warned me." Councilwoman Anya cut him off, her expression hardening. "These are unsubstantiated claims based on the mystical pronouncements of the Solarans. We need concrete evidence, not superstition." Elijah slammed his fist on the table, the datapad clattering. "The data is the evidence. The energy fluxes, the seismic activity, it's all there." "It's circumstantial," Gregor countered, waving a dismissive hand. "Correlation does not equal causation." Elijah felt a wave of despair wash over him. They wouldn't listen. They were blinded by greed, by their own short-sightedness. He thought of Kira, her trust, her vulnerability. He couldn't betray her, not after she had risked so much to share her people's secrets with him. He straightened, his voice hardening with resolve. "I'm going to the Obsidian platform. I'll get proof. Proof you can't ignore." Before anyone could object, he turned and strode out of the council chamber, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. He found Kira by the Whispering Falls, her bioluminescence a subdued, anxious blue. He told her about the council's refusal to act, his voice thick with frustration. "They won't listen," he finished, his shoulders slumping. "They think it's all superstition." Her hand reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek. The touch, soft and surprisingly warm, sent a shiver down his spine. The blue of her skin shifted to a comforting green, a silent reassurance. "They do not see," she whispered, her voice filled with sadness. They do not feel. But you do, he said, his eyes locking with hers. You feel Solara's pain. He saw a flicker of fear in her eyes, a vulnerability that tore at his heart. And I feel something else, she whispered, her gaze dropping to his lips. He leaned in, drawn to her like a moth to a flame. He dreamed of this moment, of kissing her, of feeling her close. But he hesitated, a flicker of doubt clouding his mind. Would his touch harm her? Would the difference in their physiology, their biology, create a barrier, a repulsion? He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and gently pressed his lips to hers. Her skin tasted of sunshine and rain, of the sweet, intoxicating scent of the sunwood. It was a tentative kiss, a question more than a statement. But the response was immediate, a surge of warmth, of acceptance, flowing from her to him, a silent affirmation that transcended words, that erased all doubts. He pulled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes, a hint of confusion mingled with wonder. He realized then that this was her first kiss, that their cultures, their ways of expressing affection, were vastly different. He smiled, a soft, reassuring smile, and reached for her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. He would learn her ways, he would respect her customs, he would navigate this new, uncharted territory with patience and tenderness. He would show her what human love meant, and he would learn, from her, the secrets of Solaran intimacy. I have to go to the obsidian platform, he said, his voice soft but firm. I have to get the proof they need. A wave of anxiety washed over her skin, turning it a vibrant, agitated amber. It is too dangerous. They will not welcome you. I have to try, he said, squeezing her hand. For you. For Solara. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. She knew she couldn't stop him. He was driven by the same force that drove her, the same fierce protectiveness for this world, for their shared future. Then I will help you, she said, her voice ringing with determination. He knew what she meant. She would use her connection to Solara, to the Sunwood, to disrupt the Obsidian Corporation's operations, to create a diversion, to give him the time he needed to gather the evidence. It was a dangerous gamble, one that could cost her dearly. He saw a flicker of fear in her eyes, but also a steely resolve. He pulled her close, holding her tight. Be careful, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. She nodded, her skin pulsing with a fierce, violet light. She turned and disappeared into the sunwood, leaving him standing there, his heart aching with a mixture of love and fear. He knew what he had to do. He had to get the proof, he had to expose Obsidian Corporation's lies, he had to save Solara, not just for the colony, not just for Kira, but for himself. He'd found something here, on this alien world, something he'd lost long ago, on a planet bathed in the light of a single, indifferent sun. He'd found hope. He'd found love. He'd found a home. He wouldn't let it be destroyed. Not without a fight. The obsidian platform hung in the violet sky like a predatory insect, its drilling rigs plunging into Solara's flesh. Elijah piloted the small shuttle, his hands tight on the controls. Kira sat beside him, her skin pulsing with a nervous, amber glow. The sunwood, usually a source of comfort, felt distant, its energy muted, suppressed by the obsidian hand. He glanced at Kira, her luminous eyes fixed on the platform, a mixture of fear and determination in their depths. He reached out, his hand covering hers. Her skin was cool, almost clammy. He squeezed gently, a silent reassurance. He'd managed to bypass the platform's security systems, thanks to Kira's intimate knowledge of Solara's energy flows. She'd guided him through a hidden energy channel, a path only the Solarans knew, a secret she'd shared with him, a testament to her trust. He felt a surge of gratitude, of responsibility. He wouldn't fail her. He landed the shuttle in a secluded docking bay, the silence broken only by the rhythmic thrum of the drilling rigs. They emerged into a sterile, metallic corridor, the air thick with the smell of ozone and machine oil. Elijah activated his data recorder, capturing the evidence he needed. Kira stayed close, her senses alert, her body radiating a faint, protective glow. They reached the central control room, the heart of the Obsidian operation. The room was filled with technicians monitoring banks of screens, oblivious to the damage they were inflicting on Solara. Elijah moved quickly, downloading data, recording sensor readings, documenting the corporation's reckless disregard for the planet's delicate ecosystem. He felt a surge of anger, of righteous indignation. He wouldn't let them get away with this. Suddenly, alarms blared, red lights flashing across the control panels. A technician shouted, "Energy surge detected." Somewhat activity escalating. Elijah's heart sank. He knew what this meant. Kira had acted. She was using her connection to Solara, to the Sunward, to disrupt the Obsidian operation, to give him the time he needed. But it was a dangerous gamble, one that could cost her dearly. "We have to go," he said, grabbing her hand. But it was too late. The doors hissed open, revealing a squad of Obsidian security officers, their weapons trained on them. "You're trespassing," the lead officer snarled, his voice amplified by his helmet's comm system. "You're under arrest." Elijah stepped in front of Kira, shielding her with his body. "We just want to talk," he said, his voice tight with tension. "We have evidence that your operation is destabilizing the planet." The officer laughed, a harsh, metallic sound. "We're not interested in your fairy tales. Take them into custody." As the officers moved forward, Kira's skin pulsed with a fierce, violet light. The air crackled with energy, the lights flickering. Elijah felt a surge of fear, a premonition of something terrible about to happen. "No," he shouted, pushing her behind him. "I'll go with you. Just leave her out of this." He knew what he was doing. He was sacrificing himself, buying her time to escape. He thought of his parents, of his lost family, of the new life he'd found here, with Kira, on this extraordinary planet. He wouldn't let it be destroyed. Not without a fight. The officers seized him, their grips tight, their weapons pressing against his back. He glanced back at Kira, her eyes wide with fear and gratitude. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, a silent promise. He was led away, the heavy metallic doors slamming shut behind him, sealing his fate. But he knew he'd made the right choice. He'd chosen love over duty, loyalty over self-preservation. He'd chosen Kira, he'd chosen Solara, he'd chosen hope. And in that moment of darkness, of uncertainty, he felt a strange sense of peace.